So a lot of people have been asking about Liam's surgery when he was a newborn. I posted on social media today that it was the 2-year anniversary, and every year I kind of take a moment to kind of remember the anniversary. But there's a lot of people who either weren't part of our lives then or who were and still never really knew what the whole story was. So I decided to kind of try and answer all the questions I've gotten really quick at once. Not quickly, but all at once. Um, so Liam was 3 weeks old at the time, and when he started to spit up usually after a nursing session, um, and I just darn got a reflux baby was my first thought. It got to be a little bit concerning to us when he would spit up even when he was asleep. So, being new parents, being deathly afraid of SIDS, being a speech language pathologist, and being deathly afraid of aspiration, we had him sleeping in his swing because it was the most upright thing we had at the time that he could sleep in. But also it moved and kept him asleep, which any new parent knows that that's priceless. And we kept the swing right next to our bed. So therefore, as soon as we started hearing him choke slash spit up, we could jump up out of bed and help clear his airway. So over just a period of 2, 3 days, it went from kind of just spitting up to a lot of spitting up. And he was getting upwards of like 4 spit ups between each nursing session. And it wasn't just like dribble, dribble, oh my goodness, look, he's spitting up. It was starting to get to the point where we literally had furniture across the family room covered in sheets because it would just come out with power behind it. During the time, my brother had come to visit for my birthday and to meet Liam for the first time. And he got to witness this too. It was crazy. And so I went to the pediatrician and they took a look at it and they're like, you know what? He's not even distressed by it. He's not screaming. He's not upset. It really looks like you got yourself a happy spitter. So I was like, okay. And they're like, just watch for wet diapers. And I was like, great, we'll do. We'll keep an eye out for wet diapers. My brother and I decided to take a pretty decent trip up the bay. I was living in South Bay at the area at that time in California, and we decided to take a trip up north a bit to a restaurant that we'd grown up with as kids and loved. There's like one in the whole area. So we went up there just for lunch before he was leaving to go back to LA where he lived. And we got up there and Liam slept the whole way there and he slept through the entire lunch. So we really just got to have conversation and hang out as brother and sister. And it was great. It got to be the end of lunch and I looked down and Liam had spit up all over himself. And what scared me to death was that he had made a sound. So I had no idea that he had been spitting up. And that's why I got really scared. So I called the pediatrician again and was like, I need to come in again. Like, we need to talk. And so we came in, my brother was there, and, I nursed him. And sure enough, during the session, from the point where I nursed him to us just talking to the doctor, I mean, she saw him just profusely spitting up. Not distressed, not upset, just profusely spitting up. And she was like, really keep a close eye on him. She goes, there's this one problem. It could be, but I don't really think it is. But let's just keep a close eye on him. And if he stops having wet diapers, we'll take another step. That night, we changed his diaper, put him to bed, nursed him in the night like you do newborns. And the next morning, he woke up and he had a dry diaper. And the day just ticked on, and the spitting up was coming to upwards of 6 times a session. Not just like, the doctor originally had asked me, is it, like quarter of a teaspoon, half a teaspoon? And I'm like, we're getting to like quarter of a cup here when he's spitting up. It was large amounts. And that same day, we got past noon, and there was still no wet diaper. So I called the pediatrician and said, we don't have any wet diapers. And she said, you need to go to the hospital. Now, it's the middle of winter, it's flu season. So she had literally gotten us appointments, so we literally could walk in for the session for an ultrasound and walk back out. So at this point, I'm texting all my girlfriends, like, I don't know what's going on, I don't know what they're looking for. And one of my good friends was Googling it too. And she's like, everything I'm coming up with online is saying this thing called pyloric stenosis, but it's really, really rare. Not uncommon, but rare. But that's the only thing I can come up with other than, just reflux. And so I had at least that word jumbling around in my head. And the pediatrician said, you're getting an ultrasound of like his digestive tract, and then you're leaving immediately. Do not stay. Do not be around those germy people. Go. I got in. It was a short wait in the waiting room. They moved us back to the ultrasound room. My dad picked up my mom he left a meeting he was at, picked my mom up from a place she was at, dropped her off at the hospital, and then he went back to his meeting because Oliver was at work. I didn't want to be there by myself. And my mom's a nurse, so she knows a lot of the lingo a lot better than I do. And so they did the ultrasound on him, and they said, we need you to go back to the waiting room. And I said, well, my pediatrician told me to leave and that she would call. She didn't want me to stay. They're like, no, we really need you to go back to the waiting room. Okay. So I sat in the waiting room for 20 minutes. In that time, he literally cleared out that corner of the waiting room, but just because everyone, I'm sure, thought he had the flu with how much he was spitting up. He destroyed my outfit. He destroyed my mother's outfit. He destroyed all 5 outfits that I had packed for him for this single trip. That's how much he was spitting up. And then suddenly someone stuck their head in and they're like, is this Liam? We're like, yes, you need to go home immediately. Your pediatrician doesn't want you here, which of course I'm like, well, duh. But at that point, I'm like, well, if they're letting me go home, there can't be anything serious, right? So we drove home, and we weren't home more than 10 minutes, like trying to relay to my husband what was going on, and the phone rang, and it wasn't a number I recognized. And it was his pediatrician. And she goes, I sent you home because I know you, and I know you wouldn't go home. But he has pyloric stenosis. We're going to have to do surgery on your baby. So pack your bags. You're going to be in the hospital for a week. I was able to keep it together on the phone call. Yes, okay, how long? What are we looking at? What does that mean? When will we get more information? And the whole time, my mom's sitting there holding Liam, who's spitting up all down in front of her. My husband's standing there frozen because he doesn't know who I'm talking to or what they're saying. And I got off the phone and I looked at them 2 years ago still. And I broke down and I cried. And the only thing I could say is they're going to do surgery on my baby. So once I pulled myself together, I realized I had nothing to pack. He had spit up on every item of clothing my post-baby body still fit into. So my awesome mom literally had me pack laundry baskets, and she took laundry baskets home to do laundry for us. We packed the bag. We packed what we had, for Liam and for ourselves, and we went to the local hospital, the one he had just been born at 3.5 weeks prior. And we got there, and the nurse walked up to me, and she was like, Mom, you need to feed your baby one last time. We're putting him in PO. He's not allowed to eat until after surgery. And at this point, it's Friday, and they're talking about surgery on Monday. And I'm realizing I'm going to have to watch my newborn baby be hungry for days. They put an IV in. They do, what I loved about this hospital is they actually did it outside the room, so they didn't want anything negative impacting the room that the baby was in, because they really wanted to be a healing space for the baby. So my husband went. I just couldn't. My husband went with. They put the IV in. They brought him back to me. And they gave us a small little cup of sugar water and a pacifier. And all night long, all we could do to satiate him, he was getting fluids through his IV, was to dip his pacifier in sugar water and put it in his mouth and try to explain to a 3.5-week-old why they can't get any food. And it quickly became apparent that I couldn't hold my baby because he would smell me, and he would smell the milk, and he would get so upset. He would turn red and then blue and then purple, just smashing his head against me, begging for food. So the next day, my parents came, and my parents, they were there with us practically around the clock, and they just helped pass him around and rock him and try to soothe him. The next day, on Saturday, they want to do a follow-up ultrasound. They're going to do an ultrasound each day leading up to Monday, when, the OR for pediatrics was open again. Everything was pretty much closed down except for the rooms, except for the main OR for real emergencies. So Saturday, late afternoon, they finally were able to get us around into the ultrasounds. They just had a lot of big cases going on that weekend in the hospital. So they put me in a wheelchair and put him in my arms. Really strict rules there so that no babies could be kidnapped. So you can't walk around carrying your baby in the halls or anything. And so they put me in the wheelchair and they wheel us to the ultrasound room, and they do another big ultrasound. They bring a doctor in. They want him to look at the ultrasound. They bring in multiple people to look at the ultrasounds. They don't tell us anything. They send us home. They send us back to the hospital room again that we're living in. And so we go back to the hospital room. We're rocking, and the doctor on call pretty much comes in and says, "We phoned Lucile Packard Children's Hospital, Stanford, and the surgeons are coming down this evening. The surgery has to be done immediately. It's a lot more serious than we expected." So then it was a waiting game. We were just waiting for the surgeons to come down. The surgeons got there, and at the same time, an emergency appendicitis came. So they had to deal, of course, with this poor child who has emergency appendicitis. Liam was okay getting his fluids. At this point, he hasn't eaten in 24 plus hours. So he was pretty lethargic, which was actually a blessing. So he was just sleeping a lot, and he wasn't begging for food all the time. So he seemed at least a little more at peace. Due to the lack of food and how tired he was. So, my parents stayed in the room with him, and Oliver and I kind of went for a walk in the hospital, just trying to, especially for me, just clear my head and get ready for what we were about to walk into. A really dear friend of ours at the time came and brought dinner and just snuggled on him, and that was the biggest thing, because you can feel really alone at those times. And it really shows you who your friends are at that time, the ones who put everything on hold and make the drive to sit there and hug you and pray with you and be there in person. So it was really huge for her to actually come and make that effort to come over. It was a big deal for her to find people to watch her kids and stuff. So she came and was awesome hanging with us. And they came to take my baby. And again, you can't carry him in the halls for kidnapping reasons, to make sure that nobody's stealing a baby. So we had to put him in his bassinet, lay him in his bassinet, and with all the nurses and support staff, and then me and my parents and this friend of ours, we walked him to the main OR because, again, pediatric OR is closed. So we walked him down to the main OR, which was really startling for me because just 3.5 weeks prior, I'd had to deliver him in the main OR because for lots of reasons I wasn't allowed to deliver on labor and delivery. So I literally found myself sitting and standing at the exact place I'd been waiting to meet him, and I was having to say goodbye, and I was having to hand over my newborn. So we stopped there, and my mom asked the doctors, "Please stop, please wait. Can we just please pray over this baby?" And so up to that point, I'd been okay, and I'd been holding it together, and my mom prayed for him, and then one of the nurses put her hand over mine and said, "You have to let go. You have to give us your baby. You have to trust us." And the surgeon was there, and she's like, "I've done a lot of these. It's going to be okay, Mom." And I let go, and I lost it. I turned away and headed for the waiting room, and I remember my dad putting his arm around my shoulder and crying with me. So we all just kind of walked to the waiting room. And that friend, she came down from the room where she'd been waiting, and she sat in that waiting room with us. She'd walked part of the way with us and gone back to the room, and then she went to the waiting room and met us there, and she just sat with me. And for an hour, I just sat and watched the minutes tick by, and I felt like I sat in that waiting room for a year. And we just sat and waited. And it was so amazing to have my husband and my parents and that one friend just sitting there with me. And we had friends texting and calling, but to have people sitting there, physically holding your hand, feeling that weight with you as you sat in the waiting room, it was something I can never thank that person enough for. And we just waited, and it was the longest hour of my life. And all of a sudden I heard, "Parents and Liam here?" And I leapt out of my chair, and my dad actually let out a chuckle. I jumped up so fast. I was like, "Yes, I'm here, I'm here." And they're like, "He's done, he's fine. The surgeon's going to come out here in a minute to talk to you, and then you can go back and see him." And so the surgeon came out, and she showed us literally pictures they had taken inside his stomach, and it was 100% confirmed. It was a very severe case of pyloric stenosis. They'd actually had to go in and cut. What pyloric stenosis is the valve at the bottom of the stomach. The muscles grow too quickly, and so it closes off. because it was closing off, everything he was eating was just sitting in his stomach and then coming back out again. And so that's why we weren't getting any wet diapers, and that's why we were getting such powerful spitting up, because his stomach was backing up from how much he was eating. So they actually had to go in and they had to slice that muscle and to get it to release so that he could start processing food again, processing the breast milk he was taking in. And so so she showed us the picture, she explained it, she said it was very successful. The rate of recurrence in this is like slim to none, so this should fix everything, and that we'd be allowed to leave the hospital as soon as he was back to eating with no spitting up. So they didn't let us go back. And there's a picture up on my Instagram account that I posted, and you literally see him. And because he was in the main OR, they didn't have any masks small enough for his face to give him oxygen. So these amazing nurses are literally standing there with the oxygen tube, holding it up to his face, trying to push oxygen into him because they don't have anything. Like they tried the oxygen mask and it practically covered his whole head. And just being able to sit there and look at him, and I literally was just so stunned, just looking at my baby. That one of the nurses finally went, "Mom, like you can touch him," and just being able to grab my baby's hands and hold them, and walk back with him back to the room again, and just love on him again. And it took quite a few days and a lot of long nights to get a nurse back to health where he could actually eat and not throw everything up. So we were there, I think, about a week in the hospital from the day we went in on Friday to when we finally got him eating enough that they would release him to go home. And he had lost so much weight. He was so skinny when we went home. But, you know, they did laparoscopic, so he's got what almost looks like 2 little bug bites on his abdomen. You can still see him to this day if you look close. And then they went in through his belly button. So we had a lot of post-op and things afterwards to do. But it was definitely the scariest couple of days of my life as a new mom. But, you know, I knew from the beginning, I mean, Liam was a miracle. We tried for 3 years before we finally became pregnant with him. And we knew that, you know, it was not our own doing. You know, we weren't one of those people who were like, let's have a baby, boom, we're pregnant. It was totally a God thing that we got pregnant. When many specialists said it would be really hard, if not impossible, for us to, without other interventions. And so we knew from the beginning that this baby was God's baby. But that was that really quick reminder, 3.5 weeks old, that I have no control over what happens to this baby. I have my job as his mom, but that he is in God's hands, and God's going to protect him. And it was a really hard lesson to learn really, really fast. But he's okay, and he's healthy, and he's a happy 2-year-old boy right now. But it was definitely terrifying. And if I learned anything from it, I learned that when friends are going through a hard time, the biggest thing you can do is to be there and sit next to them. You know, they don't. I mean, I learned that in infertility, and then I learned it going through pyloric stenosis, that you're not looking for your friends to fix it or to have all the answers. You're looking for the person who will physically do whatever it takes to get there and sit there next to you and hold your hand and be there. I mean, texts are great, texts are great, and calls are great, but somebody who's actually going to hold your hand and love on you then is huge, you know, and just sit there with you in that valley and be willing to say, you know what, this sucks, right there next to you, and let you know it's okay to cry and it's okay to be scared, and just pray over you and pray with you. So it was a huge lesson for me, and not only God's protection over my son, but also in what one needs when they're in that place. So sorry for all the emotion in this video. I can't tell the story without getting emotional about my baby, but that's the story of Liam's surgery at 3.5 weeks old.